At first it looked like an accident, one of those rare, tragic accidents that the ocean reminds a person of from time to time. The Coast Guard of Hermanus received the signal in the early morning of March 22nd, when the fog had not yet lifted, and the wind carried a thick smell of salt and iodine from the ocean. Fishermen reported that something huge, grey, with a broken skin surface was lying on the sand. They mistook him for a dead whale washed ashore at night tide. There have been dozens of such cases, but no one knew then that this morning would be the beginning of the strangest chapter in the modern history of marine biology. When the first group of rescuers reached the place, they noticed that the birds, usually circling over the carrion, kept their distance. Not a single petrel landed closer than a dozen meters. There was an oppressive silence in the air, broken only by the muffled claps of the waves. The whale's body seemed mutilated. His skin, thick and dark, was torn as if from a tremendous pressure from within. The front part looked relatively intact, but everything below the pectoral fins was simply missing. The cut was too smooth, as if the flesh had been torn apart by something other than teeth, with monstrous power and precision. The experts arrived from Cape Town by noon. Among them was Dr. Marcus Els, a marine pathologist who had worked with large marine mammals for more than 20 years. He immediately noted that the damaged structure did not correspond to any known cause of death. There were no signs of a collision with the vessel, no dents, no marks from the screws. There were also no ragged edges typical of shark attacks. It looked as if the body had been subjected to a short-term but colossal force directed from within. Some bones were crushed not by external pressure, but as if from resonance, as if a shock wave had appeared in the body. According to the official version prepared by the evening, the cause of death was a collision with unidentified industrial equipment. This version was convenient, clear, and safe to publish. But none of those present believed in her. The entire team of specialists stood by the torn torso, looking at the internal tissues, burned and darkened, as if under the influence of an incredible temperature. However, there was no smell of rot. The flesh was fresh, almost warm, as if the whale had died very recently, perhaps only a few hours ago. As dusk began to fall on the shore, the wind picked up, and the waves became heavy and viscous. The evacuation service staff recorded strange fluctuations in the instruments. The compasses were deflected, the cameras had difficulty focusing, and the microphones caught a low-frequency hum, as if emanating from the ground itself. One of the operators noted that the hum coincides with the rhythm of the surf, but from time to time it becomes clearer, turning into something like a pulse. This sound was not recorded completely. Only fragmentary vibrations remained on the film, which could not be deciphered. By morning, the whale's body began to be transported. It turned out to be heavier than expected, as if his flesh had absorbed something extra: water, salt, or perhaps energy. The leather left shiny marks on the gloves, resembling a metallic coating. One of the biologists who examined the tissue samples later noted that when exposed to light, they gave a faint glow. However, laboratory analysis did not confirm the phosphorescence. The glow disappeared as soon as the samples were placed in an airtight container. The official report, published a day later, was dry and concise. The death of a whale, presumably a sperm whale, was caused by an unidentified mechanical impact. But a few days later, photos taken by eyewitnesses before the arrival of the authorities appeared on the internet. They showed that the lower part of the torso was completely missing, and the edges of the tear were covered with small dents resembling teeth prints. In one picture, taken at an unusual angle, one could make out an even row of footprints going deep, as if something had bitten the carcass in half. This caused an instant surge of interest. At first, users wrote about shark attacks, then about giant squid, but very soon the attention shifted. The destruction lines were too smooth. Dr. Henry Clayton, a professor of marine biology from Oxford, was in Cape Town for a completely different reason when he learned about the discovery. He was given several fragments of a video made by a member of the rescue team. These images show a piece of the skin of a research drone found next to the body. The metal was bent and melted, as if it had been grabbed and squeezed with incredible force, but there was nothing nearby that could explain this effect. No traces of electricity or thermal effects. On the same day, the professor contacted colleagues from the National Oceanographic Center and asked for satellite data from the area that evening. This data was a turning point. The images taken by infrared sensors showed a dark, elongated silhouette, moving against the current at an abnormal speed. Its length, according to preliminary calculations, exceeded 30 meters. The body had no clear contours, as if it consisted of a dense mass of water. Some fragments of the frame showed a faint glow inside, similar to breathing or beating. When the professor presented these data to the management, the reaction was cold. He was asked not to disclose the information until the official verification, but a week later, he was removed from office due to a violation of the confidentiality protocol. While the scientists were arguing, the coast was shrouded in rumors. Fishermen talked about sounds resembling a rumble underwater. Their boats were shaking, and their sonars detected strange voids areas where the signal was not reflected, as if something was absorbing it. These voids moved, changing directions, sometimes appearing directly under the boats, and then people felt a slight pressure in their ears, as in deep diving. After several such cases, many refused to go to sea. Cape Town authorities announced military exercises in the offshore area and closed access to private vessels. But there were rumors among the fishermen that this was not an exercise, but a search operation. At night, lights appeared above the ocean, slowly gliding across the surface. Some said they were drones, others that it was something else, too big to be a car. Several eyewitnesses claimed to have seen the water around the lights rippling in an unusual way, as if something was moving under the surface. On the third day after the zone was closed, one of the divers from a private research group working nearby posted a short video. On it, he showed a fragment of a metal panel, curved in an arc, as if it had been squeezed. There was a low, drawn-out sound like a groan in the background. The video lasted less than a minute, but had the effect of an explosion. After a few hours, it disappeared, and the author's account was deleted. It was said that the man was seen at the airport the next day, but he never officially returned home. Meanwhile, a team of biologists working at the site of the first find reported strange changes in the sand and water. The grains of sand taken from under the whale's body had a different chemical composition. Microscopic particles were found in them, unlike either known minerals or products of industrial origin. These particles had an anomalous property. Under a microscope, they moved as if reacting to light. This movement could not be explained because the particles were inorganic. Attempts to repeat the effect in the laboratory failed. They solidified, becoming ordinary quartz granules. The story was getting darker by the day. The scientific community is divided. Some considered everything that was happening to be a chain of coincidences. Others saw in it signs of something else, perhaps a new biological phenomenon. But silence reigned within the research structures. All reports related to the discovery were classified. Even the photos from the laboratory, taken for the internal archive, were erased. Only one document has been preserved in a private copy, a handwritten note by Elsa's assistant. The wounds are smooth, almost mirror-like. The fabric doesn't seem to be cut, but removed. There are no knife marks, no compression marks, just emptiness. By the end of the week, locals began to notice that the water near the shore had changed color. It became darker, deeper, as if a shadow had spread all over the coast. Some claimed that at night the sea glows softly from within, but not like bioluminescence, not with the soft green light of plankton, but with a thick, heavy glow, as if someone is illuminating the surface from below. This effect lasted for a few minutes and disappeared when the boats approached. Professor Clayton, who was already under surveillance, continued to collect the materials secretly. He claimed that there was a life form under the ocean that man had forgotten about. The creature is probably older than the entire modern biosphere. He wrote, "The ocean is the memory of the planet. He does not forgive those who disturb her peace. Maybe the whale wasn't the victim. Perhaps it was a warning." These words were never published. The professor's papers disappeared along with his archive. Official sources later claimed that the scientist had left the country, but those who knew him intimately said otherwise. In the last entry of his notebook, there were only two phrases: "The shadow is moving north." We were wrong to think she was gone. That's how the first week ended after the body appeared on the shore. The authorities removed all the equipment, fenced off the site, and posted warnings about biological hazards. But even after the sand became clear again, the locals claimed that at night they could hear a rumble like breathing. It seemed to come from the very depths, from the very abyss where no one dared to descend. And when April came, hundreds of kilometers north of that place. The Namibian fishermen reported that their sonars had detected emptiness again. She was moving slowly but steadily, heading towards the shore. After the events on the coast of South Africa, the ocean temporarily subsided. It seemed that everything was returning to its usual rhythm. Ships were cruising along the coast again. Fishermen dared to go fishing, and scientists were analyzing the data obtained. However, inside the labs, behind closed doors, there was a quiet, intense discussion. The reports received from satellite stations did not fit into any of the known models of the movement of sea masses. Several independent systems recorded the appearance of huge anomalous cavities in the water, which disappeared and reappeared, moving along the continental shelf. These voids did not reflect the sonar signal. They seemed to absorb the sound, leaving behind a silence that was dead and dense. The first research attempts began in early April. Formally, they were led by a private company specializing in oceanographic projects, but unofficially, representatives of the Navy were involved in the operation. The group had at its disposal 2 research vessels, 3 autonomous underwater drones, and a deep-sea surveillance station capable of operating at depths of more than 3 kilometers. The supervisor was Dr. Lydia Hale, a woman with an impeccable reputation, known for her cold precision and caution. The purpose of the expedition was to identify the source of the acoustic anomalies and determine whether there is a physical object causing distortion of the signals. Hale insisted that the research be conducted in radio silence and without involving the press. Everything that happened was recorded on internal servers protected by military protocols. When the first vessel, the Abyssal Dawn, reached the designated area, the sea looked surprisingly calm. The surface was smooth, almost mirrored, and even the wind seemed to avoid this place. Acoustic sensors have been installed on board, ready to detect the slightest pressure changes. 6 hours after the start of the dive of the first drone, sensors detected ground shaking. It was not seismic activity, but something else, rhythmic, like breathing, but coming from a great depth. The drone descended to 1,000 meters when communication with it began to be interrupted. The image became blurry, and there were disturbances similar to light pulsations. Then a shadow appeared on the screen for a second. She didn't move, just filled the entire frame space. After a moment, the connection was cut off. The equipment registered a sharp drop in water temperature and the disappearance of the sound background. None of the sensors detected an impact or collision. It's just an absence, emptiness. A few hours later, the drone surfaced. Its body was deformed, as if it had been subjected to pressure exceeding permissible limits. The metal was coated with a coating, dense, shiny, resembling dried mercury. When the plaque samples were delivered to the laboratory, they began to evaporate at room temperature, leaving a barely noticeable odor reminiscent of ozone and iodine. Dr. Hale ordered the preparation of a second dive, but with additional equipment, high-frequency hydrophones and thermal sensors. This time, they decided to immerse the drone in an area where the sonar showed minimal water resistance, a place that the engineers called a window. It looked like a perfect sphere where the sound disappeared completely. At 300 meters, the drone transmitted an image of a surface that looked like billowing smoke. It was not a substance, not a mist, but something dense, moving, but without form. The light beams of the spotlights were not reflected. They simply went out, as if absorbed by an invisible screen. When one of the researchers tried to increase the brightness, the picture distorted. For a split second, the outlines of a structure appeared through the interference, something like a ribbed arch extending into the depths. But the scanners did not detect any solid matter. At that moment, a sound was heard in the operator's headphones, deep, low, as if someone had uttered a word, but too slowly for a person to grasp its meaning. The sound lasted about 5 seconds, after which the instruments registered an instantaneous increase in pressure. The connection was cut off. After a few minutes, the water around the ship changed color. It became thicker, darker, as if something had awakened below. The waves went from the center of the circle, forming regular concentric rings. The devices recorded micro-vibrations similar to the heart rate. One of the experts compared the graphs with previous recordings. The frequencies coincided with the background noise recorded near the dead whale. Dr. Hale ordered the work to be stopped, and the ship moved to a safe distance. But, as it turned out, there was no safe distance. That night, When abyssal dawn was drifting, thick steam began to rise from the surface of the water. It had no odor, but the instruments detected the presence of unknown organic compounds. Steam moved against the wind, enveloping the hull of the vessel. Traces of corrosion appeared on metal surfaces, smooth, in the form of concentric circles. 3 days after the incident, the second vessel, Nereis, attempted to launch an autonomous buoy with a neutrino scanner. This type of device has been used to capture particle flows passing through matter and has never been used in oceanography. However, 40 minutes after activation, the sensors showed a surge of unknown energy. A flash appeared on the screen, not of light, but of absolute darkness, as if the device itself had recorded the absence of space. After that, the system failed. The incident report ended up in closed archives. But later, one of the technicians involved in the operation anonymously reported to the network that a few seconds before the shutdown, the device transmitted a short audio fragment. Its frequency was too low for the human ear, but when accelerated, the recording resembled human breathing, ragged and heavy. Spectrum analysis showed that the sound was not mechanical. It came from the environment, as if the water itself were breathing. In the same days, coastal stations began to record strange tidal deviations. The sea level was changing irregularly, as if a hidden mass was acting under the water column. Sometimes a low rumble could be heard in the depths, similar to distant thunder. This happened only at night, and the duration of the hum coincided with the cycles of the lunar phases. Scientists have tried to link the phenomenon to underwater volcanoes, but no traces of geothermal activity have been found. Dr. Hale, meanwhile, has assembled a new group. She was joined by specialists in bioluminescence and acoustics. They hypothesized that the source of the signals is a colossal living being that uses ultrasound to communicate. But the calculations did not match. The power of the sound pressure exceeded the capabilities of any known organism. To create such waves, a body at least 100 meters long was needed, and the tissue density was higher than that of a whale or squid. That was the first time the unofficial name Shadow of the Abyss was mentioned. It was introduced by technicians who worked with recordings. They noticed that on the spectrograms, the sound was accompanied by a frequency dip, as if something was scooping out chunks of silence from the signal. This shadow could not be explained by physics. It just appeared where the noise should have been and disappeared when the appliances were turned off. In the second half of April, the expedition reached the deepest point in the region, a trench extending 5,000 meters. This place was listed on the maps as a zone with a minimum standard of living. However, the sensors showed something else. The water temperature there was higher than normal, and the oxygen level was lower. A faint radiation resembling a pulsating arc was detected inside the trough. No one knew if it was a living organism or a natural phenomenon. The dive of the third drone was the last. His camera transmitted an image of dense darkness. Suddenly something flashed, like a reflection of a metal surface. Then the lens captured the movement smooth, slow, like a sigh. Lines like veins or fibers flashed along the edges of the frame. They moved in concert, as if reacting to the presence of the machine. After a few seconds, the camera recorded a stream of bubbles, and the image distorted. From the last frame, only a fragment was recovered, a structure resembling an eye, huge and motionless, with a vertical pupil. After that, the drone disappeared. No wreckage or signals were ever found. After the incident, Dr. Hale filed a report asking for the surgery to be stopped. She wrote that further research could lead to irreversible consequences. However, the termination order was not signed. On the contrary, new vessels equipped with heavy equipment arrived in the region a week later. Their goal was to determine the level of potential threat. From that moment on, everything came under military control. Locals noted that after the ships arrived, the sea changed. The surface of the water seemed to become thicker, like oil. The fish was gone. The birds stopped flying over the shore. At night, a glow similar to the northern lights appeared in the sky, although it had never been observed here. People said that it did not come from the sky, but from below, from the depths of the ocean. Meanwhile, the laboratories remaining on land began to study the previously obtained water samples. Microscopic structures resembling nerve cells were found in them. They reacted to electrical impulses, although they consisted of an unknown substance. Researchers have suggested that it is part of a larger organism, perhaps its tissue. But as the samples dried, they collapsed, leaving behind only traces of salt. Every day, scientists became more cautious in their conclusions. Many of them refused to participate in further operations. Some left without explaining the reasons. Those who stayed spoke of feeling pressured, as if something invisible was watching them. Electronic failures began to be recorded on ships. The compasses were spinning. The instruments were losing their orientation. Rustles and fragmentary words appeared on the radio network, as if someone was trying to speak from the depths. A recording made at one of the stations has only partially survived. Breathing can be heard on it, followed by a short thud, like a blow on metal, and the barely discernible word, deeper. When the recording was listened to in accelerated mode, it turned out that the background noises form a structure similar to human speech. It wasn't an ordinary echo. The abyss itself seemed to be trying to speak. At the end of April, the water temperature in the study area dropped sharply. It was unexpected. The ocean current had to keep the heat stable. But in a few hours it changed, as if someone had opened a passage into another layer of water. At that moment, the hydrophones registered the last powerful pulse, a frequency that coincided with the mammalian heart rate. After that, everything went quiet. Dr. Hale wrote in her journal, "The sea has stopped, but it feels like it's waiting. Something is awake and listening. We can't see it, but it's nearby. It knows we're here." This was the last entry in her journal. 2 days later, the abyssal dawn vessel stopped communicating. In its place, the satellites recorded only a faint glow in the water, resembling a trail of burning gas. No debris, no distress calls, just disappearing. This is how the first phase of underwater research ended, and although official sources claimed a technical accident, no one among those who saw the initial data doubted that they had encountered no natural phenomenon underwater. Something was looking at them from the darkness, something that shouldn't have woken up. When the abyssal dawn vessel stopped communicating, the official version sounded fast and dry. Loss of radio contact due to malfunction. But none of those who were connected with the expedition believed in the accident. The loss occurred suddenly, without distress signals, without warnings. No storms or magnetic storms were recorded on the weather maps of that day, just disappearing. 48 hours later, a search vessel called Solstice was sent to the area where the glow was seen. His task was to survey the possible crash area and collect data. On board were military specialists, engineers, and several civilian scientists who remained from the original team. Among them was a young acoustic engineer named Carol Byrne, who managed to save copies of the latest recordings from abyssal dawn hydrophones. These files would later become one of the few sources that made it possible to reconstruct what was happening underwater. Upon arrival in the area, the search team discovered that the ocean surface has an unusual structure. The waves did not move chaotically, but seemed to obey an internal rhythm. The water seemed to breathe, swelling and settling like a living thing. The instruments showed a weak electromagnetic field emanating from the depths, but the source could not be determined. The first hours of diving yielded no results, no debris, no signs of a fuel leak, only darkness and dense, viscous silence. When the drones reached a depth of 2,000 meters, something strange appeared on the cameras, a cloud of fine suspension, similar to ash. But the ashes can't be underwater. The particles moved slowly, forming spirals. In the center of this structure, the instruments recorded a short-term change in pressure, as if a cavity had appeared inside the mass. An acoustic shock pulse followed, destroying one of the sensors. The connection was cut off. From that moment on, a wave of malfunctions began. Instruments lost calibration, computers froze, navigation systems showed erroneous coordinates. Some devices recorded readings that contradict the laws of physics, negative temperatures at stable pressure, pulsations in a void where there should be no movement. On the third day of the search, Captain Solstice reported strange lights underwater. They didn't look like light reflections. They were steady, slowly moving spheres glowing with a cold blue glow. Their range of movement was about 1 kilometer, and they appeared strictly at night. They disappeared at dawn. When one of the devices tried to approach, the glow went out, and a short-term pressure surge was recorded next to the vessel, as if someone or something of a huge mass had passed under the keel. These observations forced the authorities to completely close the zone. From that moment on, the information about what was happening became secret. All reports, logs, and audio files were seized and archived as confidential. But rumors began to spread among the crew. People said that at night they could hear thuds on the hull, as if someone was knocking from below. Sometimes this knock was repeated 3 times, at equal intervals. Some claimed that they felt a slight vibration of the floor, as if the ship was shaking from the breath of the sea. Meanwhile, strange phenomena began to occur on the shores of Namibia. Fishermen found dead dolphins washed up by the waves. Their bodies had the same injuries as the whales, smooth, as if the edges had been cut off. Biologists who arrived at the site recorded the same glow of tissues that had previously been observed in the first find. However, this time the corpses began to decompose abnormally quickly. Within a day, only the skeletal skeleton remained. The analyses showed that there were no microbial colonies in the tissues at all. Biodegradation did not occur at all. When the photos got to the press, the authorities announced a massive disease of marine mammals. But independent experts pointed to something else: the absence of signs of infection. It looked like something was removing life, leaving only a shell. Carol Byrne, who studied acoustic recordings, noticed a pattern. Each time before the signal disappeared, there was a short burst of low-frequency noise, resembling a heartbeat. There is an interval of exactly 6 seconds between the pulses. It matched the frequency of the whale's heartbeat, but the sound source was at a depth of more than 4 kilometers, where the pressure ruled out the existence of known organisms. At a closed-door meeting, the scientists hypothesized that they might have encountered a life form independent of the biochemistry known to man, an organism that uses the structure of water as its own body, existing outside the usual physical limitations. This idea was considered absurd and immediately rejected. But it was after this meeting that new disruptions began. During the week, soil vibrations began to be detected along the entire coastline. They occurred only at night and were accompanied by a low hum, reminiscent of distant singing. People complained of insomnia, headaches, and nightmares. Some claimed to hear a soft call in their ears, as if someone was whispering from deep within. These complaints coincided with the appearance of a faint glow in the sea. In mid-May, the cargo ship Horizon left the port of Luderitz. It was supposed to go along the coast and deliver the equipment to Angola. On the 3rd day of the journey, the crew stopped communicating. A week later, the Coast Guard found him. The ship was drifting without a crew. There were no signs of a struggle on the deck. All the instruments were working. The power was not turned off. Personal belongings remained in their places. The last entry in the log read, "A sound is heard underwater, not as a mechanic. It's like someone singing." After this incident, the government officially declared the area closed to shipping. On the maps, it was marked as an area of increased seismic activity, although no seismograph recorded tremors. In fact, the area was isolated from civilian access. Military patrols and signal buoys broadcasting warnings have appeared on its borders. Meanwhile, the satellites continued to record anomalies. Spots emitting weak radiation periodically appeared on the thermal images. They moved along the currents, sometimes disappearing, sometimes reappearing closer to the shore. One night, one of the spots rose to the surface, and then the surveillance cameras at the station in Valvis Bay captured a short-term phenomenon, a giant shadow slowly passing under the water column. Its contours resembled the body of a whale, but its length exceeded 100 meters. After this incident, the authorities finally stopped publishing the data. All observation stations were put into closed mode, but leaks still occurred. One of the engineers sent a series of images to the network, where a line of footprints is visible, an even row of depressions on the seabed extending in an unknown direction. Each indentation was perfectly shaped, like the imprint of a bone ring. According to calculations, the distance between them corresponded to the stride of a creature at least 50 meters long. These pictures caused a storm of discussions. Someone was talking about an ancient being who had awakened after thousands of years of sleep. Someone claimed that these were traces of experimental devices. But among all the versions, one turned out to be the most frightening, that the ocean did not just hide the predator in itself, but released it outside. Soon, new emissions began on the coast. First it was fish, then seabirds. Their bodies had the same damage. Internal organs were destroyed, but the skin was intact. Biologists have recorded an invisible impact that tore the tissue from the inside. Some have suggested that this is the result of powerful acoustic waves, but the source of such waves remained unknown. At the same time, eyewitness accounts appeared. People living by the sea talked about night sounds, low, deep, as if someone was moaning underwater. Sometimes the sounds were so strong that the windows in the houses shook. Shepherds in the coastal mountains claimed to hear this rumble even at a distance of tens of kilometers from the shore. The government denied everything, but panic was growing inside the departments. Messages about pulsation under the crust, abnormal acoustic resonance, and violation of the structure of water density were transmitted through secret channels. Scientists who had access to the materials talked about the formation of a certain zone where the physical parameters of the environment deviate from the norm. This area was gradually expanding. Meanwhile, the ocean temperature continued to drop. Thin strands of ice appeared on the surface, although the climate of the region excluded freezing. The water became denser, heavier, as if saturated with something invisible. At night, in the light of the moon, one could see patterns appear on the surface, concentric circles, similar to the prints of giant suckers. At the end of May, a message was received from one of the tracking stations. The equipment recorded a short pulse, enormous in power, directed upward. A few seconds later, a column of light appeared in the sky above the ocean, visible even from the shore. It lasted no more than a minute, after which it disappeared. A foggy funnel remained in place of the flash, rotating clockwise. The water in it was moving against the current, as if someone from below was pulling it in. From that moment on, it became clear that something was coming to the surface. The next day, dense fog enveloped the coastline. It appeared suddenly without a change in temperature and lasted for 3 days. The radars were not working, and satellite communications were interrupted. People on the coast described a strange feeling, as if the air had become heavy. In the night, distant sounds could be heard, similar to the cries of animals, but distorted, stretching like an echo underwater. When the fog cleared, the sea looked different. The color of the water changed. It became dark gray, thick, and even in the light of the sun did not reflect the sky. Dead birds were found in the coastal waves, their wings covered with a thin film resembling oil. There were footprints in the sand that looked like the tracks of giant fins moving away from the shore. A week later, the first boat disappearances were recorded. The small fishing vessels that went fishing did not return. Rescue operations yielded no results. In the places where they disappeared, sonars recorded short-term breaks in the signals, as if the waves were passing through an invisible wall. Carol Byrne, who continued to analyze the audio files, noticed that the low frequencies recorded in recent days had begun to change. The sounds became rhythmic, more organized, similar to repetitive phrases. When translated into the audible range, they formed a structure resembling speech. Dozens of specialists listened to the phonograms, but no one was able to identify the language. Only one word was repeated in different recordings, which was later translated as "remember." By the end of May, it became clear that the shadow of the abyss did not just exist, it was moving. According to satellite data, the anomalous zone was moving along the current, heading to the northwest. This meant that it would soon reach densely populated coastal areas, but the government denied any threat, claiming that everything was under control. However, those who were at sea knew that the ocean had changed. The water has stopped being neutral. She seemed to have a life of her own, breathing heavily, slowly pulsing like a creature preparing to awaken. And every beat of this invisible core echoed in the sky, in the earth, in the bodies of people. The sea was listening, and something in his depths, older than fear, was beginning to rise. When the waves started sounding different, people didn't notice at first. The sound of the surf became quieter, as if the sea was suddenly tired. As night approached, the water did not make a noise. It whispered. Only those who lived near the shore were the first to feel the change. They said that at night the air becomes dense, the sounds are muffled, and a barely discernible beating, similar to breathing, hangs over the surface. The official services did not respond at first. After the disappearance of the boats and the death of Horizon, attention shifted to the search for possible causes: underwater currents, methane emissions, geological fluctuations. But all measurements showed the norm. No instrument detected any anomalies, although eyewitnesses continued to report the same signs: fog, glow, and a strange hum. A few weeks later, a group of geophysicists from Johannesburg arrived in the area. Their goal was to establish a network of new sonar stations to track the movements of the anomalous zone. The first data turned out to be frighteningly clear. The underwater space within a radius of 100 kilometers completely reflected the signals. Inside this ring, the sound did not spread at all. It was physically impossible because even in the densest water, the sound does not disappear. Here he just disappeared. It felt like there was a structure under the water column that absorbed everything, not only the waves, but also the very concept of vibration. Scientists have called this an acoustic silence zone, but no one dared to go inside. At the same time, birds began to die on the shores. Hundreds of seagulls and petrels fell in flight, as if encountering an invisible barrier. Their bodies were undamaged, their eyes remained open, and their pupils were dilated. Biologists recorded an instant death, the cause of which could not be determined. Weak electromagnetic radiation was detected in the tissues, as if the body had momentarily become a conductor for unknown energy. When the number of dead birds exceeded 1,000, the authorities recognized the presence of abnormal factors for the first time. The area was declared closed, patrols were deployed along the coast, and communication was restricted. But the rumors have already spread. People began to leave the coastal towns. The villages were deserted. Where the lights had been burning a short time ago, there were now rows of empty houses with broken windows. The wind carried sand through the streets, and salt from the sea settled on the roofs. Meanwhile, signals continued to arrive from the depths. Acoustics, analyzing underwater recordings, said that the sound becomes purposeful. It's like he's looking for a response. In some areas, the hydrophones recorded uneven pulsations resembling phrases or rhythmic sequences. Everyone who listened to these recordings described similar sensations: heaviness in the chest, ringing in the ears, sudden nausea. Several researchers later claimed to have heard human voices in the noise, but distorted, as if they were coming from water. The first human incident occurred in the village of Kelp Haven. There, at dawn, residents found the body of a man washed up on the beach. He was wearing the uniform of a private security company, probably one of those who patrolled the restricted area. His body looked strange. His skin was dry, as if it had been dried by heat. His eyes were cloudy, and his mouth was open, as if he was trying to scream before he died. The medical examiner wrote in the report, "The cause of death is multiple internal ruptures of organs, with no external injuries. Pressure, as in the case of a whale. Only now it's human." This discovery caused panic. The authorities tried to hide the details again, but the photos leaked online. People wrote that the corpse seemed to be turned inside out, that the skin has become thin, almost transparent, that the body gave off a faint glow in the dark. After this incident, all residents were evacuated from the area. A quarantine line was stretched along the coast, beyond which it was impossible to return. But even far from the shore, the wave of unknown activity continued to spread. Power outages began to be recorded in Cape Town. The compasses were losing direction. Magnetic field fluctuations appeared on the recordings of weather stations, coinciding with cycles of underwater sounds. Scientists have begun to talk about how the ocean has become a source of energy impulses affecting space. At the same time, there were reports from fishing vessels from neighboring areas. The captains claimed that shadows appeared under the water, running across the ships. Some of the shadows were huge, over 1 kilometer long. Their movement was accompanied by a vibration similar to a distant hum, but the instruments didn't register anything. It was as if everything the eyes saw didn't exist for technology. In July, one of the satellites recorded a rare phenomenon, a huge spike in temperature below the surface. The images show a circle with a diameter of about 5 kilometers, where the water glowed in the infrared range. 30 seconds later, the temperature dropped sharply, and the circle disappeared. 2 days later, a series of underwater tremors was recorded in the same place, although seismographs did not register any earthquakes. These events coincided with another discovery. A metal fragment washed up on the coast. It was heavily deformed, an alloy of titanium and nickel. According to the markings, it became clear that the part belonged to one of the underwater drones that disappeared along with Abyssal Dawn. Pressure marks froze on the inner surface of the fragment, as if the metal had been squeezed by giant jaws. Smooth lines, the same angle, and inside, There are remnants of an unidentified substance that looks like an organic film. After this discovery, the theory became stronger among researchers. The shadow does not just move, it interacts. Something deep inside reacts to technology, to sound, to heat. It discerns presence. From that moment, the so-called silent windows began. These are areas where all the acoustics suddenly disappeared. There was no sound of the sea, no wind, not even footsteps. People who found themselves in such places described a state of horror. They felt as if the air around them was getting thicker, as if the sounds were disappearing not only from the outside, but also inside their heads. Some lost consciousness. When they were found, they did not remember anything, except for one thing, the feeling of the presence of something nearby. The military found an overturned boat in one of these areas. There are only clothes and broken appliances inside, but there were traces on the bottom that looked like handprints. Not human. The fingers are longer, the joints are displaced, as if the bone structure is alien to the usual anatomy. These traces could not be washed away. The metal beneath them darkened, as if it had entered into a chemical reaction. Reports called it abnormal oxidation, but the researchers knew it wasn't corrosion. It's a footprint. Gradually, the situation got out of control. The weather has changed. The wind that had previously been blowing from the ocean was now coming from the land, as if the sea was sucking in air. The waves became higher, and every seventh had a special shape, curved, almost vertical, like a wall. These waves appeared without wind on their own and disappeared, leaving streaks of black foam in their wake. The water no longer reflected the light. During the day it seemed opaque. At night it absorbed everything, even the reflection of the moon. People said that in this blackness you can see movement, slow shadows that look like bodies sliding just below the surface. One night, satellite cameras recorded a strange phenomenon on the border of the zone. Within a few minutes, the ocean surface had completely leveled off, and all the waves had disappeared. And then, the glow began, millions of tiny lights lining up in spirals. The spirals moved against the current, connecting into a huge figure resembling an eye. A column of steam rose from its center, and for a moment the camera caught a shadow stretching for hundreds of meters. After this signal, the satellite turned off. The following days were turning points. The bodies of marine animals that had never been seen in these waters before began to wash up on the shore. Deep-sea fish, strange, elongated, with transparent skin and white eyes. Some were still alive when they were found, but died in a matter of minutes. At the moment of death, a low, almost musical sound came out of their mouths, as if something else, someone else's, was exhaling from inside. Scientists tried to examine the samples, but everyone who worked with them noted the same feeling. Anxiety, as if someone was watching. Some said that even after leaving the laboratory, they heard the same sound, low, pulsating, reminiscent of a call. Meanwhile, people began to disappear along the coast. At first, there are isolated cases, a tourist, a fisherman, a worker, then whole groups. No one saw it happen, just silence and nothing else. Sometimes footprints were found in the sand, deep and indented, as if the earth was being pulled down. By the end of the month, the military acknowledged that the situation was unexplained, but even they didn't understand the scale. Everything that was happening looked not like an attack, but like a slow penetration, as if the sea was dissolving the boundary between itself and the world. At sunset, one of the satellites transmitted the last image. In the dark grey ocean, a giant shape is visible, bending under the water column. Its length exceeded anything that had ever been observed. The body was moving slowly, and something resembling limbs could be discerned in its outline. After that, the connection to the zone was completely lost. The sea became silent. No surf, no wind, no bird calls, only a dull, ringing silence in which one could hear one's own heart, and how, from the depths, with each of its beats, another responds. When the last satellite stopped transmitting signals, it seemed that everything was over. On the screens, where the contours of the anomalous zone had previously flickered, there was now only grey, a flat background, as if space had been crossed out. But on the coasts of South Africa, people continued to hear the rumble. It did not subside. It penetrated through walls, through the ground, through water in jugs and pipes of houses. It was impossible to measure it with instruments. It existed not as a sound, but as a sensation that slowly corroded everyone's inner silence. The authorities have declared a state of emergency. All cities within a radius of 100 kilometers from the sea were evacuated. The remaining communication stations were jammed and roads were blocked. But even far from the shore, people reported strange vibrations. Something was moving inside the ground, as if waves were now rolling under the ground. And the further away from the ocean, the more distinct the fear became. Scientists who disobeyed orders tried to continue their research on their own. Among them was Dr. Henry Clayton, the one who first uttered the words about the relic creature. He disappeared on the eve of the evacuation, leaving behind only an audio recording. A quiet voice, trembling with fatigue, can be heard on it. This is not an organism. It's a memory. The ocean remembers itself, and now he remembers us. His words became the last thread connecting people with an attempt to understand what was happening. Meanwhile, sounds like a roar stretched over a clock began to rise from under the water. They were low and deep, as if the earth was humming. In different parts of the world, from Argentina to Indonesia, seismographs recorded simultaneous vibrations with the same rhythm. The frequency coincided with the same beats that had previously been recorded by hydrophones on the bottom. It was as if the sea had become a single entity. News of what was happening reached the world's press, although officials tried to deny the reality of the threat. Scientists made assumptions. Some talked about the return of the megalodon, an ancient predator that lived millions of years ago and may have survived in isolation under ocean basins. Others argued that it was something else, a creature without bones, without shape, created from the water itself. There were also those who recalled myths about the Kraken, about Leviathan, about Tiamat, about the primordial abyss, where all life originated. Everyone was looking for an explanation, but they all felt the same way. It wasn't an animal. It's a comeback. The archives of old civilizations have suddenly acquired a new value. Texts were found at universities mentioning the sounds of sleeping seas and the breath of the gods under the waves. The ancient Scandinavian sagas described a monster whose sleep maintains the balance of the world. If he wakes up, the sea will cease to be a sea. In Sumerian records, there was a word similar in sound to what was heard on hydrophones, atuma, which translated as deep memory of water. It seemed as if the myths were warning, but no one was listening. Meanwhile, the ocean was changing shape. Satellite images taken before the loss of communication show huge patterns on the surface, circles, elongated lines, similar to a neural network. Scientists assumed that this was a reflection of wave vibrations, but the patterns were too regular, as if someone had drawn them with purpose. Inside these figures, the water temperature was different from the outside, as if invisible channels ran under them. One day, a funnel appeared in the sky over the Atlantic, a dense swirl of clouds stretching down. Meteorologists called it an atmospheric collapse, but its structure did not resemble a storm. In the center of the rotation, the air was stationary. A column of steam rose from inside, and for a moment, the cameras captured a silhouette that looked like the body of a giant, translucent as if made of liquid. He did not move against the wind, but with it, as if the wind were his breath. After that, the migration of animals began. A flock of whales went to the southern waters, followed by dolphins and sharks. Fish have disappeared from coastal areas. The seas were empty. Only the darkness under the water remained alive, and the less life there was, the more the waves shone at night. The authorities admitted defeat. The area has been declared a world-class closed zone, but it was impossible to keep the borders. The rumble spread across the ocean, echoing in every sea. The same phenomena began to appear on the quiet shores of Europe and Asia. Fog, glow, and disappearance. Everything that started in the south has now engulfed the planet. International groups investigating the phenomenon have divided into camps. The first claimed that this was a geological process, the underwater awakening of an ancient tectonic cavity capable of changing the hydrosphere. The second talked about the cosmic factor, about the connection with the magnetic cycles of the sun. But still others, the very few, whispered about the living. They claimed that the ocean had developed a form of consciousness. that billions of years of information compressed in its depths have formed into something more, into a mind as ancient as the planet itself. This idea seemed crazy, but after the events of the end of August, it became indisputable. That night, the entire Atlantic basin shook. Seismographs recorded a pressure wave that passed through the entire ocean. The water rose tens of meters but did not collapse. It froze. Satellite images show how the surface is arched upward, as if a giant chest is breathing under it. And then exhale. The wave left without destroying the shores, but a sound remained in the air, booming and lingering, which was heard on all continents. This night would later be called the Night of the Whispers. People said they had heard the words, not in human language, but each culture understood them in its own way. Some have heard a request, others a warning, and others a call. Scientific instruments have recorded a frequency spectrum corresponding to the range of human speech. But its structure was non-linear, as if thousands of voices were speaking at the same time, each with its own rhythm. After that, all life began to change. In the coastal forests, the trees darkened. The leaves were covered with salt, as if sea dust had been blown up by the wind and settled on land. The animals' migrations were disrupted, and the birds stopped singing. People complained that they could hear an inner hum even in their sleep. Psychologists called it the oceanic whisper syndrome. But doctors could not explain why patients had synchronized dreams, identical visions, dark water, a giant silhouette calling from the depths. These dreams came to thousands of people at the same time. Some of them began to write symbols that resembled ancient forms of writing, although they had never seen them. One day it started raining in the Namibian desert. This in itself was rare, but the drops of water had a salty taste. Steam rose from the sand, and in the morning the surface of the desert became smooth as a mirror. In his reflection, one could see the sea, even though it was hundreds of kilometers away. The people who came there claimed that they saw movement under the surface, as if the earth itself had become transparent. At the same time, a giant silhouette was again recorded in the ocean. Its length exceeded 300 meters. He moved slowly, gliding beneath the surface. Whirlwinds appeared around him like whirlpools, but steady, like rhythmic sighs. The instruments on board the military vessels that observed this stopped working. Compasses spun, metal vibrated. The people stood motionless, unable to move, as if they were being held by a force that had no name. Later, one of the surviving sailors said that he saw the water around the ship split, as if something had opened up under it. A sparkle rose from the depths, not light, but awareness, as if the darkness itself looked at them. He said, "It's not a beast, it's an eye." After that, his mind collapsed. Many began to believe that this was the kraken, not an animal, but the embodiment of ancient fear, the living embodiment of the abyss that existed long before man. Hints were found in different religions: the biblical Leviathan, the Nordic Ermungand, the Japanese Namizu. All spoke of one being who keeps the boundary between the world of the living and darkness. And now, it seemed, that boundary was crumbling. Several months have passed since Abyssal Dawn disappeared. During this time, the world has changed. The seas began to darken, a phenomenon when the water stops reflecting light. Scientists have recorded that pressure and density are increasing in these areas, as if a different environment is forming there. People stopped coming to the ocean. Even the birds avoided these places. The last recorded signal came from the station in Tristan da Cunha. It was a short radio packet, just one word transmitted on all frequencies: remember. After that, silence. Since then, the ocean has ceased to be the sea as it was known. The waves are still coming, but they carry a different rhythm, not the earthly one. Sometimes at night the water glows, and then you can see the outlines of something huge under the surface, like the breath of a planet that has finally woken up. Some believe that this was the end. Others are just the beginning. Because if the ocean really remembers, then memory is life. And if life is a memory, then perhaps the person was just a moment in his dream. There are no old outlines on the maps now. The coastlines have dissolved. The currents have changed. The old navigation paths no longer exist. Only rare vessels dare to go to the open sea. Their captains say that at night, in the deepest darkness, when neither the stars nor the horizon are visible, you can hear the water talking. She doesn't say the words. She's just calling. And everyone who hears this call understands that there is not just darkness under the surface, but something ancient that was waiting for humanity to remember who was the first to rise from the depths. Because the whale was thrown out to sea, but no one has ever explained what killed it. And maybe the question wasn't who did it, but why did the sea decide to show that it was still alive? The world became quieter, but sometimes, when the wind brings the smell of salt, it seems that somewhere far away, beyond the horizon, a huge mind is still breathing. And then the earth trembles slightly, like a heart responding to the call of its own creation.